I want to begin with something that is actually of a central interest to both of us, is the idea of time. Anytime any of us see anything change in our environment, we realize that time has passed, right? We observe change, we interpret time. So in a way, I think in performance, I would think change is your first instrument towards time. And one thing I find incredibly powerful, Nikhil, and I think you're the only artist that I've actually seen who does this, having spent 30 years in the art world, where taking a long format of a long durée performance, you could go from the character of a Victorian empress to an Indian aristocrat to a fakir and a coal miner, all in the course of one day. And while you trace the biographical arc of these characters, you would attend to your own biology. You would have lunch, you would go to sleep, people watch you sleep, and they don't leave somehow. I have no idea why. But you continue to maintain that microclimate for 72 hours, 86 hours. So this time is a sort of vital resource, right? And you use it in so many ways. So I'd love to hear you talk about time, you know.
Thank you, Jitish. That was really, I mean, I hope we are recording this because I would love to have these notes and this framing because, you know, your perspective has been very important to me, which is why, you know, I thought we would begin these images with our collaboration and the conversations that we've started 20 years ago. So, you know, it's 2025. And, you know, I want to first, of course, acknowledge the relationship that one has, of course, with time, but also with place. And I think that this is a moment where I just want to take a breath and acknowledge my collaboration and my relationship with Bombay and this city where I found, in a sense, my grounding. I was able to create a relationship with the community over here. It started with Rachna Sansad Academy of Fine Arts and Craft, and I have some ex-students sitting in the audience. And it started with friendship, really, you know, because I think that if you are to build a relationship around trust, you know, and you are to sustain that across time, right, and allow for each other to feed each other and to evolve, you know, it's very important to hold on to a good thing. And over this period of 20 years, I feel like what I've done most, that has affected me most, is as much the art, but it's also what is behind the art. It's the process that has led up to making that work, you know, and it's not been without immense connections that I have made. And it starts with my relationship with my best friend, Munir Kabani, who's, I wish he was here tonight. But it's really that sense of belief that when you spill an idea out to a friend, they come to it with a sense of empathy and possibilities because they implicate their own bodies and their own presence with you, to partner with you, to see themselves in your work with you is where some of these relationships that have really nurtured who I am today. And then, of course, my relationship with Mortimer Chatterjee and Tara Lal, which was also 20 years ago, that, you know, off a DVD, you know, decided to build on a partnership that is not just sustained, but is nurtured, and we've grown together. And then there's Shivani Gupta, right, who's a photographer, a dancer, an artist, you know, who's 20 back then, and, you know, in time has doubled in age. Sorry, Shivani, to divulge information you may not have wanted me to. But we're talking about time and how do we keep an understanding of ourselves in relation to that? How do we understand the transformations and how do we take cognizance of those transformations, you know, that not just happen on our body, but spill out of our body and create not just not just studio spaces with a bunch of people hanging out and, having a good time and a good laugh, but how do we create ecosystems, right? How do we feed off of each other so that we can become something that is sustainable, so that we can become something that allows us to put food on the table? Because those, at the end of the day, are the realities of how we have to go through this life and go through this journey. And then, of course, my relationship with costume designers. And you kind of talk about various elements that enter my practice, right? Which is costume and sets and food. So you have to understand that one can't be good at everything. And one has to be aware of what talents one brings to an idea and to the mix, and what talents one invites into their work. And so it's been very important for me to invite people like Lois Braganza, who's been designing costumes for the past 15 years, and these are really the marination, or the sort of the pickling, that I'm really interested in, the fermentation that, you take something and it becomes something else, And that's what's, I think, led into creating HH Artspaces. It's not to formalize that, but to understand the value of those relationships and those friendships, that one says, okay, what next then, And how do we then, create not just a community, but a force, I always kind of think about like water falling into a pond, and the concentric circles that ripple out of it, And I'm very aware of how those patterns actually is something that really is something that's really fed me and fed my family and fed my life. And of course, HH Artspaces is an organization that's now 10 years old and has been thriving, not because of what we do, but in spite of what we do, It's because there is a need that is felt, and it's over the years, this organization or disorganization, this institution or this flexstitution, as I like to think about it, has grown beyond our imagination, beyond our expectations, and beyond any aspiration. And here we are today, at the threshold of the next Kochi Biennale, and we are all in it together. And when I say we are all in it together, I mean that every single one of you in this audience sitting here is in it with me, is in it with us, and we're going to see it through with grace, with dignity, with pride, with joy, with love, and with trust, and that's what I'm looking forward to.
Nikhil, I want to bring you back to time. This is a chronic condition I went through as well. I could tell that Nikhil so deeply engaged with the biennial that he's relinquished the entire sweep of his work and has moved on to HH and is right in Kochi back, right?
Yeah.
And has taken a vow that it's going to be a great Biennale. But let's go back. Let's back up.
Sure.
We will come to Kochi. But I think it's really powerful what you do with time.
Yeah.
And really going back to some of your performances and talking about the city, it's about taking your work through the city.
Yeah.
Or taking your work into the landscape, or taking the landscape into your work.
Yeah.
And producing time. And the reason, I think you would, of course, assume that many of the people in the room have actually participated in your performances.
Yes.
But there may be others who haven't. And in a way, getting a certain understanding of your work could be a really interesting step to understanding the curatorial part of your work, which we will come to very soon. But it would be lovely to hear you speak about the performance work.
Yeah.
That, of course, then leads into collaborations and then community, etc. But we'll just sort of go back to the beginnings.
I guess I was jumping because I just wanted to just acknowledge relationships in relation to also how they are fostered across a timeline. But I came back to India after an education in the United States. It is where I was far away from homeland, and it sort of felt like this was a moment where I had to put a different lens to myself, right? I had to sort of
be like Sir Raja,
exactly,
Yogra Chitrakar, the early
exactly. So, coming back to India with an American education, I think that there was this need to react to the set of conditions that we had here in India. And it was a really exciting time. There was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of international attention that India was getting. But I came back to India with a certain critical understanding of what it means to be an artist. And I was right from the beginning, kind of drawn to not just making objects. I was drawn to the idea of making experiences. I was drawn to the idea of putting the process into the work in a way where the process became the work. And to me, performance felt very immediate. It felt that I was able to take on the now, right? And I was able to acknowledge my relationship to material in the now. And if I was to do that, then the only way for me to understand that was to go back to the body. And to put the body at the center of making, right? And it was important to do that is because I needed that objectivity to understand the self as the maker, right? And not attribute it to the artist, but to the artwork, right? And I wanted to divert the attention away from the artist as the author, but the artist as the subject of the work. And as I put a lens to my own narrative and started to understand and use this material to unpack who I am, I was sort of revealed to a very critical understanding of who I am and what my relationship to privilege and being part of a sort of elite, group of people who had the opportunity to travel abroad and exposed to museums and the Louvre and the National Museum at a very young age. So, it was a moment for me to understand not just where we are in the now, but use the now to understand where we come from, where I'm coming from, and where I'm headed. And there was this element of trust that I felt when I arrived in Bombay, right? It sort of felt like I had come back home. I had come back to a place where I had spent many years as a young, adolescent and a young teenager. And then, in my early 20s, I spent a lot of time in Bombay going to Narsi Monji College of Commerce and Economics and got a BCom, which is when I thought that I was a terrible student. And it wasn't until I went to Baroda and MS University that I realized that, maybe I am good at studies. So so my relationship to the practice itself has been very much about discovery, and it's not something, and I was very aware that there was no way that I would be able to understand that in a studio. The only way I was going to understand that is actually placing myself in that live space, in that live moment. And when I kind of developed that relationship with Tara and Mort, I kind of proposed that I would spend 72 hours in the gallery above their gallery, in a raw space above their gallery. And that area in Colaba was still, nascent in its cultural context that as we understand it today. So it was a risk, and it was a risk that, I think everyone was there with me at the edge of their seat. And what I felt for the first time in that performance was that I was bouncing off on the desire in the eyes of people watching. So it was not just about what I was doing, but it was also about the presence of every single person in the audience as they watched me unpack this narrative, this very loose framework of a script that I had, And it was their desire that fed my desire. And that loop was very important for me to complete. And I guess what I'm really interested in at the end of the day is what time does to all of us. It transforms us. It changes us. And we hope to evolve with that change and that transformation, right? And so I'm very aware that performance as material really, at its core, is calling for transformation. And my spin on it has been over the years, has been that what I'm really, really looking for is not just transformation, but I'm also looking for transcendence, which is not easy. And I can't say that I have transcended, but at least there are those very, very micro moments. It probably happens for 1 second in that performance where suddenly matter and material doesn't matter at all, you know. All of that disappears. The care, the need to make something disappears. I disappear, you disappear. And you know, that moment is so hard to hold on to. And it's not something that one can achieve with every performance, but you know, it's really something that has been, to a great extent, that driving force to go to that liminal space, right, has been really, really very much what has been my journey in my relationship to making. But lastly, I just want to say that, you know, I'm really interested in this idea of journey, you know, that time and space are intrinsically connected. I can't talk about it like a physicist would. But what I'm thinking about is, you know, that I'm really interested in the journey. You know, I think of the, when I'm planning a performance, I'm thinking about it as a map, you know. And a map is something that's on paper, but it's really the experience of using that map as a guide to take you through time and space is where the joy happens, where the discovery happens. And the destination sort of becomes blurrier and blurrier and less important. And that's how I've sort of treated this body of work. And I don't see this as separate sets of performances. In a way, I see this as a large, long, lifelong performance work, essentially. And that's where, and I guess that's where I am at with my relationship to this work.
There's a whole cast of characters, and those characters can reincarnate. And those characters can also point to your own previous histories, right? The inheritances. Like I recall having this beautiful conversation with your father in Manchester, you know, and I...
were invited into the work at that time.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I think about them more as personas or personae. I don't.
Or your grandfather, who you summon.
Exactly, exactly. You know, and it was that year in Berlin that I spent at Freie Universität on a fellowship where I figured that, you know, practice is research. That I kind of understood that it's not actually characters that I'm playing, because a character is something that exists outside of you. It's something that you work to become. But a persona seemed a lot closer to what it is that I was doing. It sort of seems like an extension of who one is, you know, and that's that rubber banding of one's own self and putting oneself in extraordinary situations is a way of expanding on the way in which one thinks about what one can do. And so I kind of think about them more as personas than I do as characters, you know, and that's why I kind of summoned, you know, it began with this fictitious character persona called Sir Raja. That was somewhere between a ruler and a subject, somewhere between. And these in-between spaces also is something that I've really, over the years, enjoyed occupying.
The same figure can be a colonizer and the colonized, right?
Exactly.
In the same arc of the performance, right?
Yeah, and I feel we're all Sir Raja, right? We're all sandwiched somewhere between the ruler and the subject, between the colonized and the one that wants to break out of those shackles, the rule maker and the rule breaker. You know, I think we're all kind of walking that tightrope through our lives.
So, you know, just for clarifying, you know, it's an interesting biographical detail that Nikhil's grandfather was a landowner and a landscape painter, right? Would that be right?
Yes.
Right
So,
characterization, yeah.
Yeah.
And Nikhil's dad had a deep interest in acting and theatre. And Nikhil sort of fulfills the sort of next generational promise of what they set out to do, right? You kind of interbreed all this.
And I wanted to look at it with a certain sense of reverence, but at some sense I wanted to look at it with a certain deep sense of criticality as well, which is why it was very important for me to take Yogaraj Chitrakar, the character that I created, loosely based on my grandfather, who wasn't really, they lived a very average middle class sort of struggling life in Calcutta in those days. He ran a printing press. He drowned all the family's money in trying to make that printing press successful. He studied at the Goldsmith College of Art in London. So there was this sense of air about him, which was very magnetic. But at the same time, in order for me to really reimagine and understand that story or to own that story, it was very important for me to cover Yogaraj Chitrakar in charcoal and sort of like almost rub his nose into the ground, you know, and so that at some point it was very important for me to depart from that, you know, and dismantle that gentleman, you know, to turn him into, just to turn him into labor, you know, and to draw emphasis on the fact that there is no escape from labor, actually. And so labor and laboring in these performances has also been very, very important in a way for me to critically examine. Like even with Sir Raja, you know, this series is called What Will I Do With All This Land, you know. I kind of put this character in this very clumsy situation where he's saying, you know, like a child saying, you know, here are 20 toys, and the kid goes, well, what am I going to do with these 20 toys, right? So it's really kind of trying to unpack our relationship to power as well, which I've also been very interested in, which is why Yogaraj Chitrakar visiting Lal Chowk was such an important performance for me, because it really made me feel very aware that, you know, even though I was very excited about the aesthetics and the poetics of what it is that I was doing, that when you perform, you can't actually escape the politics of what it is that you want to communicate. And the politicking around what I was doing became very, very overt and dangerous in this situation where there was a military crackdown in the middle of the performance, and audiences that were students from the College of Music and Fine Art pretended to be journalists and photographers. And, you know, it sort of put the army on guard to say, you can't mess around. If you get violent, we have you on camera. You know, so it sort of became this understanding that I had that, you know what, there is no such thing as a passive audience, you know. Every single person in that audience played a very active role. And the role that they were playing was to see the performance through. That's the role that they were saying. They were all egging me on, you know, in spite of the fact that there was a crackdown. So it really made it super clear to me that, you know, even though I'm bringing something very, very personal into my narrative, there was no escaping the political.
And I think, would this precede your major walk in Bombay?
Yes.
It would, right? So I think it's really interesting how, in a way, there's this figure of the flaneur, you know, who's observing and who's enamored by the environments and making notes and drawings, but the figure himself is a curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else is curious about the figure who's curious, in that sense, becoming a kind of loop of curiosity between audience and performer.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it really, I mean, it also, you know, allowed me like to turn that blind corner, you know, to enter this unknown and to take my audience with me to that unknown, you know, and watch the anticipation in their eyes to see, okay, this guy is in big trouble now. This railway station where he's spending the night in his performance looks damn dangerous, where Girishan got really involved and said, no, you cannot spend the night in this train station like this. We have to find you a better situation because you don't look like you're safe. So it's also audience taking control of what it is that you're doing. But also it was a way for me to reimagine and understand my relationship to this city. Because unfortunately, the relationship that I had with Bombay, yes, of course, I commuted on local trains and went up and down the city, but also went a lot up and down the city in taxis. And then I got my little Maruti, and I would throw the window up and have the air conditioning on and play my music and have that kind of very sort of caged relationship with the city because of the fear of the city, right? Because it's a tough city. And so in order for me to dispel that fear, right? Because a lot of the work is about fear confrontation. It's to take on that fear, right? And use the material of performance to transform, to elevate that experience and to use that, to cut through that fear, and to come out on the other side unscathed. And that's very important as well for me, is to come out unscathed. You know, the only thing that I came away with that was painful was the blisters on my feet from walking 33 kilometers. But I understood something else of my city that I would have never not understood otherwise.
You know, Nikhil, talking about place and the figure in place, you know, and especially as we move towards Kochi and all of that, you know, the Black Pearl, a really seminal performance of yours comes to mind. And there were two curatorial projects of mine in which Nikhil had very, very seminal projects, one being the Black Pearl performance, long form, at the Kochi Biennale 2014. And maybe it'd be lovely to hear you speak about that, because it also becomes your one big step in the space where you're working now, right? And,
yeah.
and also the fact that, to me, that was real example of this play between script and spontaneity.
Yeah.
Because it did look like you had stations worked out,
Yeah.
and yet, you know, there's so much uncertainty, right? When it's such a long form, epic performance.
Yeah.
And the other, of course, being I Draw, Therefore I Think, which was a project I curated, which is completely online during the pandemic. You know, it's a Johannesburg-based project, and Nikhil had a 3-act online performance, a drawing performance where world over people joined him, right? And maybe in these two, maybe you could speak of either, but I think Kochi would probably be more interesting, right? The Black Pearl as this, because it also explores the site, the history, you know, all of that.
It was really like, I'll talk about the second, I draw, therefore I think. No, yes, I draw them. I'll talk a little bit about that, because, you know, to me it was suddenly it's like, can you imagine, you're a watercolor painter and suddenly somebody gives you a set of oil paints and says, now make me something. And so it was a format that I was not really used to. I was not really...
I knew I could challenge you with.
I know, you always have, and I have implicit trust in you, really, believe me. And it was really like, I knew that I had to get into it, and it was a moment of real reckoning, because, you know, as a performer, I felt extremely vulnerable in the pandemic, because I realized that for me to have this body-to-body, face-to-face, breath-to-breath, eye-to-eye relationship with people was so important, and the pandemic stole that away, in a sense, from me. So I felt very robbed, in a sense, of something that was so materially important for what it is that I do, is activate the live space. And the live space, for me, had died. And so for me, it was a real challenge, actually. So how do you inject that real deep sense of liveness and that corporeal presence online, you know? So I was really thinking a lot about that. So I'm really happy that you invited me. And I thoroughly enjoyed that experience until I shut the laptop, right? Because
for those who would not know what we're talking about, so this was a project which was decisively about drawing, but there's no way you could go anywhere, right? So this was completely an online project, had about 80 artists, 30 countries, etc. But we also set up with the students and programmers in Johannesburg a Miro board, where people could collaborate and draw, and they could think together as well. So one day I had a 24-hour drawing project where different artists from different parts of the world would draw alongside their audience on the single platform. So you could see the cursor and see who's drawing. But in Nikhil's particular case, I invited Nikhil to do a long form performance, knowing it's completely challenging. You're on a Zoom screen, but along with your Zoom audience, you can draw. So Nikhil split up his performance in 3 parts. Act 1 called Chitrakar, Act 2 called Blackening, and Act 3 called Michelle. Which actually let me know, when Nikhil gave me this sense of what he's going to do, it was really an insight of this play between script and spontaneity, right? Because you could tell that he would figure things out on the go, because he would be in character, off character, on the screen, but he was also drawing alongside his audience. So anyone could draw with him, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that spirit of adventure, creative adventure that you brought to that that event was incredible. You know?
And I actually got a little emotional after I closed the laptop because I didn't have that lingering presence of the audience, you know, that fragrance in the room of people's perfumes or odors, if you will, were not there. And you don't realize how much we exchange when we share a space. Like you and I right now, there's a lot of chemistry, yes, but a lot of electricity and a lot of stuff that's going on that's kind of alchemical. I can't really put my finger on it, but it's really, I think, I felt heartbroken, you know. I felt heartbroken because I wasn't able to take it anywhere. As soon as my laptop shut, I was back in my room. I was back in my house. The pressure cooker went off, and I could hear the pressure cooker, and I was like, I guess it's over, you know, which was also very poetic, actually. It was a poetic sadness. It wasn't like a boo-hoo-hoo cry, but it felt so vastly different. Coming back to Kochi, which was the diametric opposite of that experience, right? Because it was your invitation, of course, which I got very excited about, and I remember. You had me do a site visit, and in the site visit, I selected a space in Pepper House, and I was very excited about it, and I'd already designed in my mind what I was going to do, and I said, Jitish, I found it. I found the space. It's going to be Pepper House. I'm going to do this performance. It's going to be so many hours. And Jitish goes, actually, I have a completely different space in mind for you. And I was like, really? But you know what? I really want this space. He says, no, you should come and see this space. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go see this space. And I saw this space, and I liked it, but you know, I was still set on what it is that I wanted to do in Pepper House. And you said, no, Nikhil, trust me. This is going to be fantastic for you. And I'm so glad I did, because you know, I think that it really allowed me to connect, and it was not just about me immersing in my own artwork, you know, and wallowing in my own space, but I realized that you put me in plain view. You gave me windows to look out of. You framed me in such an articulate way, you know, that I got so much out of that performance, you know, spending 60 hours in that space, using it to sleep. And I really felt, with very limited means, because budgets were difficult, and you know, I realized that I had to minimize my production, like to just the bare bones. And I was there in my langot for a majority of the performance, and pretty much naked for the majority of the performance. And it broke so many conventions that I had, or so many preconceived notions I had about Kerala. You know, I was like, this is a very conservative place. Are people going to accept me? The audiences are so diverse. The audiences are coming from all walks of life. You know, and I still wanted to create this narrative about putting myself in a prison, painting the space black first, and taking it into darkness, and then pulling out light by painting white stripes onto the wall, and then kind of alluding to what perhaps lay on the other side of what looked like jail bars, you know, and it really, that moment really felt like I was going to use this idea of how does an artwork liberate oneself, and through that liberation, how do we liberate others and those around us, you know, and how does that become agency and people to feel freer because they've experienced what it is that I've gone through. And the end of the performance was very euphoric. I mean, I expressed my euphoria by walking out as a Spanish conquistador, you know, of course, relating to the history.
And the audience cried.
And I mean, I didn't cry, but the audience was getting emotional with me, but they were really rooting for me. I really felt like they were there behind me to say, I hope you get to escape Mr. Black Pearl. I hope you get to break out of these shackles and find your freedom. And to do that as a colonized figure, as the impression of a colonial figure, really felt this process of decolonization, of how we understand that and how we unpack that, you know. And it was really such a joyful moment getting into that boat and waving that red handkerchief and goodbye to everyone. It sort of really felt like departure, you know. And that sense of departure is something that I chewed on for a long time.
Yeah, to me, you know, I felt I also witnessed this relationship that you're able to build with your immediate group of collaborators who are there supporting, like an extended armature, you know, like a support structure of friendship and relationships. It's built over years. But this completely informal and unexpected tribe that would stay on and watch Nikhil sleep, you know. So it's a performance that could continue even when Nikhil's personae are relinquished between their biographies to your biology, right? And Nikhil could actually, you know, even if he's dressed like an aristocrat or a prisoner, attend to his food, which may be lying around, and there could be even glucose biscuit, right? And that's a risk I think very few artists doing the kind of performance work you do would be able to take. But you take it and you live it and you let that intersect with reality in life. I think that's powerful.
Can I demystify that a little bit and sort of slightly disagree? I think all artists do that. I think all artists in the privacy of their studio are doing something with that liminality, are doing something by pushing the boundaries. And I think, you know, I would assume you do that too. I would assume that you stay up nights or wake up at 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning. I know you go for a run or a brisk walk. You keep yourself fit. You put your body through something rigorous in order for you to transform. So I think what I'm doing in a performance is not very far apart from what you're doing in your studio. It's just that we've chosen different formats of how we share what comes out of that studio practice. So the live space is very much my studio. Right. And you're privy to that.
I shall return the compliment again. By literally saying that, I think the powerful element in this is that there's this building up of stories, rich stories, right? Because you're actually, what Nikhil was doing was drawing the horizon line of Kochi and going through the arc of being both the colonizer, the colonized, the prisoner, the person who emancipates himself. So he paints his own prison, he opens it out all through the act of drawing and painting and makes an escape in the presence of an audience over this arc of 60 hours. You risk a glucose biscuit in the room. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah.
So have it.
Thank you.
But let me come back now, Nikhil. So in a way, this brings us to the idea of community.
Yeah.
I think that's very central to your practice now.
Yeah.
The community that's anyway evolved through friendships, and Shivani, Muni, Ratna, there are many of them in the room. Yeah. So hi, you guys are all there, and you are part of the extended HH family. And HH has been now 10 years, right?
It's 10 years. 11.
Tell us all about it in the last, just give us a sort of sense of what it's been and what it does in Goa.
Well, it starts in Berlin, actually, is when I really had the opportunity to rent a shop. And it was called on its address, which was Gruntaler 9. And it was in this really sweet neighborhood, Turkish neighborhood called Wedding. And I was able to use that space. For the first time, actually, I was able to consider, can live art have a studio? Can live art, and can a live artist have a studio-based practice? And what I realized was, because it was a storefront, it was a shop, essentially, it was a dukan. And it used to be a second-hand shop with second-hand clothes and stuff. So I thought that was an interesting avatar to inherit. But essentially, what it gave me the chance to do was to interact with the street of people that passed by, right? Like the passers-by became my audience. And what started to excite me was that I was able to stop people in their tracks with their shopping bags for just a second to say, what the hell is going on in this space? You know, who is this guy dressed like a fruitcake? And, you know, what does that mean? You know, so it was really that extended out from that shop into the neighborhood, right? There was a bar right next to me on one side and a cafe on the other side. So I realized that these guys were sitting duck audiences. So in the evening, the bar would be my audience, where people would come in with their pints of beer and hang out while I was doing whatever I was doing, making a drawing on the wall. And it suddenly started to become a community space. It started to become a space where I started to collaborate with artists. There were birthday parties in there, there was stand-up comedy night, there was music, there was live shows. And it wasn't just about art, it was about activation. And it was about how can one take a space and how can an artist practice have agency, essentially. And it started to feel like, you know, you just had to throw an idea out there and open that up space to community. And suddenly people start to feel like they own that. And Grundthaler 9 is still alive today. It's still a performance space in Berlin that still exists. And if you go back to Berlin, you go back to that address, you might still see a performer. It's run by a dance studio. So you don't realize what you create, right? You don't realize the animal that you create. So I was really bitten by that mosquito, you know, if you will. And I brought that plague, if you will, back to India with me and to Goa. And I really felt that Goa had that vibe that Berlin did, you know, 15 years ago. You know, it was this place where you could go and experiment and be wild and be crazy and take risks and push the boundaries and be edgy, get naked, you know, be raw, be unabashed. So those ideas really kind of came in when I met a Frenchman on the beach, and I got into a conversation with him, and he says, I'm here in India, and I'm an artist, I'm an actor, he said, and I said, I'm thinking about renting a space in which I want to invite artists to activate with me. Roma Lusto is his name, and I do wish he was here tonight, but and I said, funny you should mention that. And together we found this beautiful old house in Siolim, which is a little village in Goa, where we decided to rent a space that was way too much space for us. Of course, we were all going out of pocket for it, and it was very expensive for us to do, but we did it anyway. And on our first open studio day, essentially we invited a few friends to activate the space, but on our first open studio day, we had a traffic jam outside the first HH Artspaces event. And I realized at that moment, I nudged at Roma, I said, Roma, just come, just come outside and see what's going on. And his jaw was on the ground, literally. And at that moment, we realized that we had birthed something that was incredible. And at that moment, I invited Madhavi, my wife, my partner, my lifelong collaborator, to join the mix and to be part of that, you know, that raison d'être, the reason to be. She's someone who comes from a critical background, from a critical thinking background, and sort of put words to our ideas. And we've not looked back. You know, we've grown and grown and grown and grown, and today we are at the threshold of the next Kochi Biennale. And today we occupy a beautiful space in the middle of Aldona Market, where Shivani runs her studio, Citron, which also works as our cafe. We pretend like as if it's our cafe. I think it is our cafe. I still have a long-standing coffee bill that I have to clear with Shivani. But it's really a place for synergy, and what it's done over the years is it's given reason for a lot of young, new generation of artists to move to Goa and to make home there. It's also given reason for organizations like Serendipity to understand that, yes, Goa is ready to have a large-scale international event where you have a very intelligent public, a well-exposed public, a critical mass that we can connect with. So the experiment has worked so far, and we're very excited about what's to come.
And you'll have a similar environment in Kochi to go back to, right? I mean, there is an audience, there's an infrastructure that's emerged really out of that thought experiment that Riaz and Bose had in 2010 and 2012. That's now grown into this incredible project. And so Nikhil, tell us really where you are, the intuitions. You could open up the invitation for all of us to come and see what you've been thinking, the intuitions that drive the Kochi Biennale office and the HH office.
For the time being?
Well, now it's, well, it's for the time being. Yes,
when I was approached to invited to curate the Biennale, I very quickly realized that this can't be done in singularity. This is not a one-man show at all. This is not something that I was desiring to take on just by myself. I realized that nothing that I've done so far has been done singularly. Everything that I've done in my life has happened with partnerships and sustained partnerships. And it was very important for me to extend my hand to HH Artspaces and say, will you do this with me? Shall we do this together? And there was a resounding yes that came from the 5 partners that we were at the time, of which Shivani is one of them as well. And Alex, our youngest member, producer, is here in the audience as well. And it felt right from the get-go. It felt that, of course, it also felt very organic in the way in which we found ourselves in this situation, right? It started with me as an artist and us doing this together. Then the last Biennale, we were invited as HH Artspaces to put together a series of performances as part of an invitation event that we did in Dutch Warehouse in the courtyard. And it was an incredible night of smashing performances that happened. We brought together 8 to 10 performance artists from around the subcontinent, and an artist from Portugal as well. And it sort of felt that, it felt like we were at home already. It sort of felt like we knew what to do with this space very quickly. Also because we are operating in a very similar ecosystem in Goa. We deal with those very similar conditions. We occupy derelict old buildings. We've done things where we've curated series of performances that have ran through the day, through the night in Aguad jail. We've done fantastic work with Serendipity Ketaki, and we collaborated and put together what we called Ground Beneath My Feet, which was a barge that we occupied for the 5 days of the festival, where we had performances happening, through the day, even through the night, in this like black coal-carrying machine, and we were able to activate it with some stellar performances with artists from Japan and France and Portugal and Italy, and it was an incredible experience for us, a very euphoric experience for us. So it was really this knowledge, in a sense, that I felt that we were building and creating around our lives in Goa, that felt very natural that we would bring that knowledge and that experience to Kochi. And it's really kind of extending, like pushing the boundaries of our own backyard in order for us to take what we do to the next level, really. I mean, it really does feel like the next level, because the scale of what we are doing is immense. The responsibility of what we are doing is immense. The stakes couldn't be higher, and I felt that, as a team, we were able to take that on, which is why, you'll see things that we've discussed today, like process as methodology, and friendship economies is something that's really driven the lens that we have used to invite incredible practice, 70 practices from around the world. And the proposals are pouring in, and each proposal is more exciting and more juicy than the other, and we're very excited to see how everything is coming together in the rhythm and in the pace that it is. It's looking like it's going to be an extraordinary Biennale. We have Bose here, who's been a real, kind of pillar of faith and trust and support, and he's really been speaking to me for a couple of, for more than a couple of years about this, and it's really feeling like the time is now, and it's really about taking on the now as far as the Biennale is concerned, in order to see how to create sustainable communities, because it's here now and it should be there forever, and that's the aim, really.
Maybe you want to open up for questions?
Sure. Yes. We've just put out the efflux announcement, so you'll get a chance to read this online as well, but I just thought I'd put those words up on the screen.
That's a very key moment in the journey of the biennial, right? When you actually put that message out there, and it's a few 100,000 people have received it, and they'll hopefully read it, and your first intuitions are out there. So anyone who's read it can, of course, respond to what you read on the efflux, but any other thought, question for Nikhil, or any observation for the evening? We've got somebody there.
Yeah. I mean, is there?
I think we've got microphones going around.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. So thank you for, first of all, sharing your wonderful practice with us. I have a question. It's a two-part question. So basically, how do you look at time in different spaces that you perform? Be it Kochi, be it Bombay, or be it Berlin? And do you see time, or like the space that you perform, as a collaborator of your practice or as a container of your practice?
Well, that's a great question. I think of it as the material of the practice. I think of it as, an artist would think about water in watercolor, It's something that comes together with the site that I'm working with. Time is always consistent. A 1 hour in Kochi is 1 hour in Tokyo, there's no difference there. But the difference between Kochi and Tokyo is the difference between two very opposite ends of a spectrum, right? So it's really, time is like one of the rails in which my train engine sits on, and a site is the other, and they run parallelly to each other. So, it's where both those things take me is what is to be discovered in the course of making a performance. Well, yes. Well, we're in a really tough time on this planet. I think we're in a time of so much unrest. We're in times of such mistrust. We're on times of such animosity. War is really something that's becoming part of everyday conversation on every dining table. And I think that it's important to not divert the attention, but to fall back on love, essentially, as currency, to fall back on relationships as currency. This is really where our strength as human beings lie, is where we connect with each other, and we feed each other, and we support each other, and we have each other's back, I like, you know, and I feel like through this Biennale, I'm making not just relationships, I'm making friends. Like, I'm really enjoying my conversation with Miriam. You know, I feel like through this process we're becoming friends, you know, because, you know, she starts off by saying, I have your back, you know, and that's so important to hear from a relationship, you know, and that can't come from just saying, from having a corporate, just a corporate relationship of a boss and a sub, you know, this, you know, the structures of hierarchy have to at some point be broken, where we are able to see eye to eye with each other, where we're able to sit together on a table and feel each other's partnership. And that's why I'm putting those words friendship and economies together, right, is because it's a moment for us to recognize that friendship actually is really invaluable, right? It's invaluable. And it's also important for us to create this notion of friendship, is because we all want to feel safe in a very unsafe world, you know, and friendship allows for that safety, for us to be able to have difficult conversations, for us to be able to take risks, and for us to be able to come out of the other side because we have someone's hand to hold us through that. And that's why I kind of draw importance to the place that friendship has in my life. And I'm thinking that's a very natural way for me to extend that into the Biennale.
Thank you. My question is can time be frozen, or are minds frozen? For example, like the space in the Biennale, it's been there for a long time. But we go in and then we come out. So that interaction, what is it? Is time frozen or the space frozen?
Well, it's not static. There's nothing I think is frozen. I mean, I love the idea of being not solid, but being fluid, you know. I love the idea that there is actually, that, you know, there is blood flowing through us. You know, our hearts are beating, our brains are ticking, Kochi is changing, the environment is changing, ecologically changing. We're at the threshold of climate, not change, but climate changed. You know, it's already over. So actually, I don't believe in freezing. I believe in motion.
Hi. My name is Veer Kotak. So Sim and I, my wife Sim and I, we are very privileged to actually have a work of yours from the remnants of your time at the Met Residency. You're not the first artist who is multi-hyphenated to be at the Kochi. You've got Jitish right there. Jitish did touch upon this, where you bring a lot of different experiences and parts of who you are in your practice to your time at Kochi, whether it's your own practice or with the HH Artspace. How are you going to be approaching this with all these competing impulses in your mind? And like a lot of your residencies, what do you think you will be bringing to Kochi, and what do you think Kochi will be bringing back to you with your time there?
Wow, that's a really strong, good question. I think what's really unique about this Biennale, what's really special about this Biennale is that it invites an artist, right, to curate this Biennale. And I think it's really important to start there, is to say, why an artist, right? Like, what is it of an artist that can become a curator? Now, and I don't mean to undermine curatorial work. I think the work that curators do is immense. In fact, through this Biennale, I have a whole new respect for curatorial work, because it's very high pressure work. It's being able to see yourself through not just one practice, not just be responsible for your own time in your studio, but to be responsible for 70 practices that have been invited to this Biennale. I think it's very, and the reason, and I want to draw your attention just a little bit to the title of this exhibition that we're going to do, For the Time Being. I think it's really important to acknowledge what we have, It's important to acknowledge the resources that we have access to and not aspire for what we don't, right? This is something that has really driven me, is to understand the conditions that we are working in. And those conditions are stunning at one level. Beautiful, multi-layered history that Kochi has and Kerala has, especially Kochi, being this port town, being this place where people pass through, And I can't help but think about Kochi and Kerala, as a body, because that's how I approach my own thinking. I even approach a site as from a place of corporeality, So I am thinking about Kochi bodily, in a way, right? In fact, if I was to look at the entire map of Asia anatomically, then, well, Kerala feels and Kochi feels like the tip of the tongue, quite like in its form as well, So I am like approaching this like probably the largest performance that I have ever done in my life. I'm kind of thinking about this as an extended durational experience for myself, as much as I'm thinking about how to use that to invite people in to have that dialogue. So I am thinking about, and I do think about, what is it that happens when a body passes through something like the sport that Kochi is, and how do we add this sweet layer or add this fragrance to Kerala and Kochi, which has been the center of fragrance making for centuries and for millennia. It's the birthplace of pepper, for example. And I'm really thinking about things, very simple material things, like I'm thinking about the omnipresence of pepper, for example, right? It sits in its counterpart to salt on every single table. Every single kitchen, whether it's Italian or German or French or Japanese, pepper is present. And where does it come from? It's foraged from the wet rainforests of Kerala, and it changed the course of this planet. So the history and the narrative of this place is really informing me. And I'm really thinking also, and I'm thinking about it like how I would think from making my own performance. So, the black pearl, in a sense, was my relationship to pepper, essentially, And in a way, I feel that Kerala has given the world that zing in the tongue, that sparkle in the mouth, that drove colonialism and, the European body insane. It was completely hypnotized by that flavor, so it feels that actually without Kerala, Europe would be bland, and it would, the European table would be devoid of that zing and that spark. And I feel that sense of awakening is something that I'm inviting artists to experience, especially our international artists that we've invited. I've put a lot of emphasis on making sure that artists come to Kerala and experience this place corporeally and physically, to have that heat and humidity and sweat, kind of really affect their own sense of self, which is what essentially I do with my own work. So I'm using the tropes and the research that has been my practice as the framework, essentially, without having to reinvent the wheel, to invite artists into that space with me. That's how I'm approaching this.
Nikhil, to kind of wrap up, if there's a last question.
Me, I am performing. Right now I am. In Kochi, I will be performing the part of the curator. That is my persona. I won't be. This is not that moment. I think the moment is really to kind of step back and allow for artists to use that space and to use the resources, and they're limited as well. Huh? These resources are not like abundant. We're working with very difficult conditions. So this is not a moment for me to use this as a moment for me to put my practice in that way forward, but it's a moment for me to invite practices to do that.
I think there's somebody who had raised a hand, so maybe if we have time, we can, let's...
Hello, sir. Actually, I would like to know how do textile and costume become a part of your performance?
That's a great question. I wish Lois Braganza was here tonight. I would have certainly implicated her in that question. But I shall try to answer that question. I'm very interested in making images. I mean, I feel like I am, at the end of the day, a picture maker, right? Which is where the word chitrakar comes from in my own exploration of persona. But, you know, I think we are what we wear, right? Each one of us sort of defines our identity based on what's in our cupboard. You know, there's a lot you can tell when you look into someone's cupboard. Believe me, I don't go about sneaking around people's cupboards. But there's a lot to be said about how we dress and what we signify when we dress. The performance space really allows me the license to break that, to get out of that mold, you know, and not just to present myself as Nikhil, as a man, as an Indian, as an urban citizen, you know, but it allows me to break those notions that I myself have about who I am, right? So this is where I'm even allowing myself to break my relationship to my own gender, right? I'm allowing myself to engender, to strip myself of my masculinity, and to create silhouettes, you know, essentially, that are outside of my own relationship to my silhouette, in order for me to take those risks and those licenses that I don't and cannot in my daily life. Costume gives me the license to do that. Also, stepping out of my daily clothes and stepping into someone else's clothes, really, there's a vibration shift, right? Something happens to you when you dress as something. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to a costume party, or you've ever worn a wig, or you've ever done makeup that goes beyond your ordinary makeup, right? And what that does to you, it makes you feel different. And that difference is where the discoveries happen for me. And I need to work with costume designers in that respect, and work with people who are experts on textile and form, because that's not my expertise. And that's why I generally invite someone who works with costumes to collaborate with me.
Nikhil, we've spoken about rest and restfulness and sleep. And I recall at some point you mentioning that being restful, centered, and getting adequate sleep might be the ground space of creativity, right? It's the only cosmic dormitory in which we surrender scale. At least that's how I feel. Where were all of us last night, right? But Nikhil, is there anything that keeps you awake at night? Is there an overdrive of curatorial intuitions? Or anxiety?
It shouldn't. I mean, when that happens, I really feel that there is something that's not going right. And it needs to be corrected. Because there are certain things that are extremely precious. And I think self-care is important. And I think it's very important for me to be very, not calculated, but be very, like, not precious also, but be very nourishing, you know, to myself. I think I need to nourish myself. It's like in the aeroplane, you're asked to put the mask on for yourself before you put it on even for your own child. And it's that analogy that I bring to all the work that I do, that without nourishment and without rest, there is no work. So there are going to be a lot of lounging and restful spaces at the Biennale. There's going to probably be a really nice nap room that we're going to make for people to come and take a siesta, you know, after a big lunch. You know, those things I think are very important to kind of not just nourish people, but nourish an exhibition, nourish an experience, you know. It's like work and play, rest and play. These things are, rest and work, these things are very important to me. I don't want to lose my sleep. I don't.
So on that restful note, it's an open welcome to everybody. 12, 20.
Everyone. I'm expecting to see everyone at the next Biennale. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jitish.
At noon, we will raise the flag.
Thank you.